Move them. Now. The flight attendant's words cracked through the cabin, sharp and certain. An elderly black couple sat quietly by the window, coats folded neatly, tickets clutched like lifelines. The woman blinked in confusion. Is there a mistake? She asked softly. There is, the attendant snapped. You don't belong in first class. Passengers exchanged glances. A man began recording. That's when the young woman 2 rows back stood up, calm as gravity. Her voice was steady, her eyes unflinching. There's a bigger mistake, she said. You just told the CEO's daughter to move her own family? The attendant scoffed. Sure, sweetheart, and I'm the Queen of England. The young woman smiled faintly, pulling out her phone, its background image unmistakable. Her and the airline's founder at a charity gala. Funny, she murmured. My dad prefers first class too. Welcome to Respect Wind Stories, a place where powerful tales come alive, and every word carries meaning. No matter where you are watching from New York, Texas, California, or anywhere across the United States, even from the other side of the world, I would love to know where you are joining from today. Share it in the comments below, and while you do, sit back, relax, and let your heart open to a story that will move your soul and spark your imagination. Every story here carries a message because in the end, respect always wins. Let us begin. The young woman's name was Ava Sinclair, adopted daughter of billionaire airline magnate Richard Sinclair, founder of Skylink Airways. Few knew she was on board that morning. Fewer still knew she had quietly taken an executive seat on the company's ethics board. Her parents, Thomas and Ruth Evans, had raised her long before fame had rewritten her last name. They had given her a home, a heart, and the courage to speak truth with grace. Now, watching them humiliated in public, Ava didn't feel anger, she felt precision. Because she wasn't just their daughter. She was their reckoning in disguise. The cabin was tense enough to hum. Phones hovered in trembling hands. Eyes darted between the young woman who just stood up and the flight attendant whose smirk was beginning to fade. Miss, please sit down, the attendant said sharply, her tone curt with forced professionalism. You're disrupting boarding procedures. Ava didn't move. I'm not disrupting anything, she replied, voice low but calm. I'm clarifying one. The attendant's lips twitched. You can clarify after you, and your... She hesitated, glancing at the couple after your companions returned to coach. Companions? Ava's tone cut like ice. You mean my parents? Passengers whispered. Someone near the front gasped. The attendant folded her arms. Ma'am, I don't care who you say they are. I follow policy. Ava tilted her head, her tone still steady. Good. Then you'll know. Section 14 amperes of your employee manual prohibits the relocation of confirmed first-class passengers based on appearance, assumption, or personal judgment. The woman blinked. You memorize airline policy? Ava smiled faintly. You could say it's part of my job. Ruth Evans reached out, her voice shaking. Baby, it's okay. We don't want trouble. No, Mom, Ava said softly, never breaking eye contact with the attendant. You don't deserve humiliation disguised as policy. Thomas, quiet and proud beside his wife, placed a steadying hand over hers. We've dealt with worse, sweetheart. Not anymore, Ava murmured. The attendant's cheeks flushed. I'm asking you one last time to take your seats in the economy cabin, or I will call security. Ava took one step forward. Do it. Her tone was so composed, so certain, it disarmed the entire cabin. You heard me, Ava continued, sliding her phone into record mode. Call them. Make sure they bring your supervisor, too. We'll see how long that smile lasts when corporate realizes you've just attempted to publicly downgrade your owner's parents. The words landed like a dropped glass. Owner? The woman stammered. Ava's expression didn't change. You're not aware who Richard Sinclair is? The attendant scoffed nervously. Of course, everyone knows he's our founder. Good. Then you'll know his daughter's name. The woman's breath hitched. Ava's voice lowered. It's Ava Sinclair Evans. I took both names, because family doesn't stop at paperwork. For a long moment, there was only the low thrum of the cabin's air vents and the quiet click of cameras recording everything. The attendant's color drained. Miss Sinclair, I didn't know. No, you didn't, Ava interrupted gently, because you didn't look long enough to see. Security arrived moments later, 2 officers and a pale-faced supervisor. Passengers murmured as the supervisor approached, confusion already written on his face. Ma'am, he said to Ava, we received a report of a disturbance. Ava gestured calmly toward the elderly couple. My parents were told to move because they didn't look rich enough for first class. Your employee decided she could override your manifest. The supervisor turned to the attendant, whose lips trembled as she tried to explain. It was a misunderstanding. Check the manifest, Ava said coolly. The supervisor typed quickly into his tablet. Seconds later, he looked up, ashen. Confirmed. Seats 1 Ampere and 1B paid in full. Booked by Ava Sinclair Evans. The entire cabin seemed to exhale at once. The tension dissolved into murmurs and stifled laughter. The attendant's knees seemed to weaken. I didn't mean. Ava raised a hand. Stop. Don't perform remorse for the cameras. If you want to apologize, you'll do it when it means something. Ruth rose slowly, taking Ava's arm. Honey, let's just sit. Ava nodded and turned toward the passengers who were still filming. Thank you, she said softly. But please, stop recording now. No one should have to relive their worst moment forever on the internet. We'll handle this. She helped her mother back into her seat, then leaned down to whisper, It's okay, Mom. You taught me to stand tall. I'm just returning the favor. Thomas chuckled under his breath. You got your mama's fire. Ava smiled faintly. And your patience, Dad. The plane was silent again. Only the hum of engines idling outside and the soft sound of Ruth's unsteady breath. Then the captain's voice broke through the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this flight will be delayed for a brief internal review. Please remain seated. Every passenger knew this wasn't just a delay. It was judgment boarding. The captain's voice had barely faded when murmurs swelled again, half outrage, half awe. Phones were still raised, but most lenses now aimed at the flight attendant, who stood rigid, face pale beneath layers of makeup. The supervisor knelt beside Thomas and Ruth Evans. Mr. and Mrs. Evans, he said carefully, on behalf of Skylink Airways, please accept our apologies. Thomas straightened his posture. Son, apologies don't fly planes. Policies do. His words landed with quiet authority. A few passengers actually applauded. Ava sat between them now, one hand on her mother's arm, the other scrolling through her phone. Every text notification was a live feed employees, journalists, even legal counsel. Her name was trending already. She turned the screen face down and looked at her parents instead. You okay? Ruth nodded faintly. I'm fine, baby. Just tired. Ava's voice softened. Then we'll rest after this is over. All of it. The supervisor motioned the attendant aside. Jenna, step into the galley, please. I was just doing my job, she hissed. Your job, he said under his breath, does not include racial profiling. Her jaw tightened. I didn't profile. He cut her off. Save it for HR. But Ava heard every word. She rose quietly and followed them into the galley, the narrow space humming with the aircraft's idle systems. Mr. Harris, she said, addressing the supervisor, I'd like you to document exactly what happened before corporate spin touches it. He blinked. Yes, ma'am. Of course. Would you prefer a written statement? Ava's eyes didn't leave the attendant. A recorded one. Video. Now. The attendant's face drained of color. You can't. Ava's smile was surgical. You're on a company plane. I can. As the camera light blinked red, Harris summarized the incident. Passengers seated correctly. Attendant initiated confrontation. Escalated to verbal humiliation. When he finished, Ava spoke for the record. I'm Ava Sinclair Evans, board-certified ethics advisor for Skylink Airways. I'm also the adopted daughter of its founder. This recording will be submitted to the Corporate Compliance Office within the hour. She turned to the attendant. Do you have anything to add before this becomes evidence? Silence. Only the faint hiss of the air conditioning filled the gap, then barely audible. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. Ava nodded once. Intent doesn't cancel impact. She tapped stop on the recording. You're grounded until further notice. When Ava returned to her seat, the passengers broke into quiet applause, restrained but genuine. Ruth tried to wave it off, embarrassed. People, please, it's fine. But an older woman across the aisle shook her head. No, ma'am, it's not. It's been fine for too long. Thomas chuckled under his breath. Guess the world's catching up to you, Ava. She smiled faintly. Took it long enough. The captain himself appeared minutes later. A tall man, silver-haired and solemn. He bent slightly toward Ruth. Ma'am, I heard what happened. If you wish, I'll personally escort that employee off my flight. Ruth looked at him for a long moment, then shook her head. No, Let her sit with what she did. That's heavier than any escort. The captain nodded with quiet respect. Understood. As the plane finally taxied, Ava exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. Outside, rain streaked the windows like cooling tears. Her mother leaned close. You didn't have to do all that. Yes, Mom, Ava said softly. I did. Because one day someone's daughter might be watching how we handled this. Thomas placed his weathered hand over hers. And you made us proud. When they landed at JFK, 3 airline executives were waiting at the gate, faces pale, postures stiff. Ava stepped out first, her parents behind her. Miss Sinclair, one of them stammered, we'd like to speak with you privately. Ava's tone was ice and silk. You'll speak with my legal team. And my parents. They speak for themselves. The flash of cameras ignited around them. Someone shouted, Miss Sinclair, is it true this was your father's airline? Ava turned slightly, her expression calm but unyielding. It's everyone's airline, she said. At least it should be. The crowd quieted. The statement would headline every outlet within an hour. As security guided them through the corridor, Ruth whispered, You didn't yell once. Ava smiled. Anger burns, authority illuminates. Her mother laughed softly. You always had your daddy's way with words. Ava looked up at the enormous Skylink logo overhead, the name her adoptive father built, now shining brighter than ever. Maybe, she said, but today felt like yours too. The following morning, the world had already chosen its headline. Billionaire's daughter confronts racism on Skylink flight. Elderly black couple humiliated, turns out they raised the airline's air. Clips from inside the plane flooded every screen. Some showed the attendant's sneer. Others captured Ava's calm precision, the quiet fire behind her eyes. Comment sections burned with outrage and admiration. The internet had crowned her the silent storm. In Skylink's glass-walled headquarters, a crisis meeting was already underway. Executives huddled around a projection of the viral video. Richard Sinclair himself, the founder, Ava's adoptive father, stood at the head of the table, expression unreadable. Find her, he ordered, before the media does. Sir, she's already landed interviews. He raised a hand. No spin, no PR. I just want to talk to my daughter. Across the city, Ava sat on her parents' porch. Ruth poured coffee while Thomas read the paper. The photo of them splashed across the front page. Lord, they even caught my bad side, Thomas muttered. Ruth laughed softly. You don't have a bad side? Ava smiled faintly. The serenity of home clashed with the storm brewing outside. She scrolled through her phone messages from civil rights leaders, airline unions, ethics boards. All wanted statements. All wanted outrage. But she wasn't looking for fury. She was calculating justice. When Richard arrived, he didn't announce himself, just appeared at the gate like a man approaching church. Ava rose to meet him. They hadn't spoken face-to-face in months. Boardrooms had replaced family dinners long ago. He studied her for a long moment. You handled it well. Ava's jaw tightened. I handled your company's failure. He nodded slowly. And exposed it better than any audit ever could. They sat together at the old picnic table, the one Thomas had built years ago. The breeze carried the scent of Ruth's garden and unspoken truths. I built Skylink to connect people, Richard said quietly. But somewhere along the way, I forgot to connect with them. Ava looked up. Then fix it. Not for me, for them. He sighed. That's why I'm here. I want you to lead the reform board publicly this time. She hesitated. You want me to be the face of your redemption? No, he said softly. The architect of our correction. That afternoon, father and daughter walked into the corporate tower together. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions. Richard placed a protective hand on her shoulder but let her step ahead. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone, the air of privilege walking behind the daughter of the couple once dismissed. Inside the press room, Ava faced the microphones. Her voice was steady. Yesterday, she began, a uniform turned arrogance into policy. Today, we turn accountability into procedure. She unfolded a document titled The Evans Initiative. This program ensures that every Skylink employee, from trainee to executive, completes cultural competency training, empathy simulation, and public accountability certification. No exceptions, not even family. Reporters erupted with questions. One asked, Miss Sinclair, are you doing this because it's good optics? Ava met his gaze. I'm doing it because optics don't board planes, people do. The room fell silent, cameras clicking like applause. Hours later, the attendant Jenna sat alone in a conference room across the building. She expected dismissal. Instead, the door opened, and Ava entered quietly. Jenna stood, eyes red. I deserve to be fired. Ava shook her head. You deserve to learn. She slid a file across the table. The Evans Initiative starts with you. You'll be its first trainee, and if you complete it, its first ambassador. Jenna blinked. You'd trust me with that? Ava's expression softened. Trust has to start somewhere. For the first time, Jenna's tears weren't fear, they were gratitude. That evening, Ava walked out onto the balcony of the Skylink Tower. The city glowed below, aircraft lights blinking like constellations. Her phone buzzed a text from her mom. Dinner's ready. And yes, your father's helping set the table this time. Ava smiled, slipping the phone into her pocket. Down on the runway, a Skylink jet lifted through the dark, engines humming a steady human sound. She whispered to herself, "Systems stable." And for the first time since that flight, she believed it. The world didn't quiet down after Ava's press conference. It exploded. Social media transformed her calm defiance into a global call for accountability. Hashtags like #The Evans Initiative and #Empathy Before Altitude trended in over 30 countries. Employees from other airlines began posting photos with signs reading, "I'm implementing kindness today." Ava watched the reaction unfold from the quiet of her office. She didn't smile. She simply studied. She'd seen movements surge and vanish before hollow victories swallowed by time. This one, she promised herself, would be built to last. Across the hall, the Reform Task Force gathered for the first official meeting. Executives from every division, HR, operations, flight, finance, sat waiting nervously as Ava entered. At the head of the table, Richard Sinclair gave her a proud nod before stepping back. All right, Ava began, voice level but commanding. Let's get one thing clear. This isn't about optics or PR. It's about course correction. We can't fly straight on a crooked compass. Murmurs of agreement followed. She pulled up a holographic display showing airline complaint data from the past 5 years. Each red dot, she said, represents a reported act of discrimination or abuse of authority. See how many there are? The screen was bleeding with them. Ava continued. Now imagine how many weren't reported. The room went silent. An older executive, one of her father's longtime associates, cleared his throat. With respect, Miss Sinclair, you can't fix human nature. Ava tilted her head slightly. I'm not fixing it. I'm redesigning the system that lets it go unchecked. She tapped a button on her tablet. A new interface appeared. Real-time behavior monitoring via cabin communication data. Every interaction between staff and passengers will be recorded and reviewed, not to punish, but to teach. Every mistake becomes a lesson. Another hand shot up. Won't employees resist that level of oversight? They'll resist until they realize it protects them too, Ava replied. Accountability isn't a cage, it's armor. Richard couldn't help but smile. The boardroom had seen power plays before, but this was something different. Ava wasn't leading with fear or ego. She was leading with logic, wrapped in grace. 2 months later, the Evans Initiative launched officially. It combined ethics training, emotional intelligence testing, and immersive VR empathy simulations that let employees experience the world from others' perspectives. Cabin crew cried during training. Mechanics asked for copies of the modules for their families. The transformation was breathtaking, but not everyone welcomed it. An anonymous memo began circulating through internal channels. It accused Ava of corporate overreach and claimed her reforms were an invasion of privacy disguised as virtue. She read it at midnight in her office, the city lights flickering below like scattered constellations. Her jaw tightened. Of course, she murmured. Every change makes noise before it makes progress. The next morning, she gathered her communications team. Find the author, she said, but don't fire them. Invite them to my office. By noon, a nervous man from middle management sat across from her, sweating under the fluorescent light. I didn't mean for it to spread, he stammered. People feel like they're being watched. Ava folded her hands. So you wrote a fear memo instead of an email? He winced. I was wrong. No, Ava said quietly. You were honest. That's better. She slid a small notepad across the table. Write me a new memo. Title it What I Learned When I Faced Accountability. Then publish that one instead. The man blinked. You'd let me keep my job? You just got a promotion, Ava said, standing. We need voices who question us for the right reasons. Later that evening, she stood on the Skylink observation deck with her father. The sunset bathed the runway in gold, and a jet thundered past one of the first flights trained under the Evans Initiative. Richard placed a hand on her shoulder. You've done more in 6 months than I did in 30 years. Ava smiled faintly. You built the planes. I just made sure people inside them could breathe." He chuckled softly. "So what's next?" Ava turned toward the sky. "Expansion. Other airlines are asking for access to our system. We'll give it, but under our conditions. They follow the Evans Code, or they don't get our tech." Richard raised a brow. "You're turning kindness into currency." "No," Ava said. "Into standard equipment." Down below, a plane lifted off its engines roaring steady, its logo glowing against the dusk. Ava watched it rise until it disappeared into the horizon. She whispered, "Altitude with integrity." The wind seemed to carry the words upward, as if the sky itself had been waiting to hear them again. 2 months after the Evans Initiative's launch, Ava's reforms had turned Skylink into an international case study in ethics. Airlines from Singapore to Stockholm requested her training modules. Universities began teaching the Evans model in leadership courses. And yet success didn't silence opposition. It provoked it. An anonymous email reached her late one night. "You've made powerful enemies. Some of the board wants you out before the shareholders summit." Ava stared at the screen, the message glowing like a threat in the dark. Her father had warned her, "When you change the foundation, termites start screaming." She closed the laptop, but her mind wouldn't rest. She knew the boardroom politics she'd inherited were laced with ego and old money. The kind that didn't like being told morality had a price tag. The next morning, she walked into Skylink headquarters with her usual calm. But beneath the surface, a quiet storm brewed. Inside the executive suite, the atmosphere was electric with tension. 7 board members sat stiffly at the long glass table. Her father was absent deliberately, she suspected. They wanted her alone. The chairman, Harold Bennett, cleared his throat. "Miss Sinclair, the board has concerns about recent overreach, your unilateral implementation of surveillance systems, for one." Ava folded her hands. "Behavior tracking isn't surveillance, Mr. Bennett. It's data accountability. We monitor performance metrics the same way we monitor safety checks." He frowned. "You've also opened our training platform to competitors. That's a violation of proprietary policy." "Not if it's licensed," she replied coolly. "Which it is. Every airline pays us a fee and, more importantly, shares their progress publicly." The boardroom murmured. Another executive sharper smile leaned forward. "And who approved that?" Ava met his gaze. "The founder. Before he retired, he signed the amendment." Their expressions froze. "Retired?" one of them echoed. Ava slid a folder across the table. "Effective this morning, Richard Sinclair has stepped down as CEO. He's nominated me to succeed him." A ripple of disbelief swept through the room. "You can't," Bennett began, but she cut him off gently. "Actually, I can. It's all in Article 12B of the company charter. Family succession applies to all recognized heirs. You approved that clause yourselves 20 years ago." One of the board members cursed under his breath. Ava leaned back, her voice measured and calm. "I know you were planning to vote me out today, but you can't impeach a CEO who hasn't been sworn in yet. And once I am, this company will never again treat ethics like a PR stunt." Silence. Even the hum of the air conditioner sounded like it was holding its breath. Then she stood, gathering her papers. "I'll give you time to adjust. The future usually arrives earlier than people expect." She turned and walked out, leaving 7 powerful men staring at one another, outmaneuvered by a woman half their age, carrying the calm of someone raised by resilience, not wealth. Downstairs, Richard was waiting in the lobby. "How'd it go?" he asked. Ava smiled faintly. "They finally learned turbulence builds character." He laughed softly, pride gleaming in his eyes. "Your mother would have loved that line." "She already does," Ava said, showing him a text from Ruth. "Remember, baby, don't fight them. Fly above them." 2 days later, Ava stood before a crowd of journalists as the new CEO of Skylink Airways. Flashbulbs strobed, microphones thrust forward. "Miss Sinclair," one reporter shouted, "you're the youngest CEO in aviation history. What's your first order of business?" Ava smiled. "Simple," she said. "We're rebranding Skylink not as a company that flies planes, but as one that lifts people. Every passenger, every employee, every soul." The audience went silent. Even reporters forgot to write. That night, as she returned home, Ava found her parents waiting on the porch. Ruth had cooked dinner, the aroma of roasted thyme and garlic spilling into the night air. Thomas grinned. "So, Madam CEO, still remember how to bless the food?" Ava laughed, taking their hands. "Always. You're the reason I ever wanted to lead." They bowed their heads, and as Ava whispered her quiet prayer of gratitude, the soft hum of a jet drifted overhead. This time, it didn't sound like business. It sounded like belonging. The following week, the Skylink headquarters gleamed brighter than ever. Cameras, reporters, and analysts from across the world had descended to witness the public handover ceremony the day Ava Sinclair Evans officially became CEO. But beyond the flashes and headlines, there was something more profound in the air. Quiet redemption. Ava stood backstage, her mother adjusting the lapel of her tailored navy suit. "Breathe, sweetheart," Ruth whispered. "It's just like church service. You just talk, and people listen because your truth is clear." Ava smiled. Except this time, the congregation owned stock options. They laughed softly, a sound that felt like home. Thomas waited nearby, his posture proud but humble, wearing a simple suit that looked out of place among the designer ensembles. Yet in that moment, he seemed the most dignified man in the room. "You ready?" he asked. Ava nodded. "Because of you." When she stepped on stage, applause thundered through the hall. The room was filled with every kind of person: employees, executives, journalists, and, in the front row, hundreds of flight attendants in uniform, watching her with awe and hope. She approached the podium and paused, letting silence fall like a deep breath before flight. "My father, Richard Sinclair, built this company from engines and ambition," she began. "But my parents, Thomas and Ruth Evans, built me from compassion and truth." Gasps rippled through the audience. Cameras zoomed in on the elderly couple, seated side by side, their hands clasped. Ava continued, "I was born into a world that measured worth in wealth, but I was raised by people who measured it in kindness. Today, I'm merging both definitions permanently." She gestured toward a new logo revealed behind her. Skylink Humanity Division. Altitude begins with empathy. The crowd erupted in applause. Later, during the reception, Ava stood on the balcony overlooking the runway. The golden afternoon sun glinted off rows of aircraft lined like sleeping giants. Each bore a new emblem, the Evans Initiative's motto, engraved near the nose: "Empathy before altitude." Richard joined her, leaning on his cane. "You just rewired the soul of aviation," he said quietly. Ava smiled. "About time someone did." He studied her face, then chuckled. "You've got that Evans patience and my stubbornness. Dangerous combination." "Efficient one," she corrected. But amid celebration, an unexpected figure approached Jenna, the flight attendant who had started it all. Dressed in formal uniform, she looked nervous but resolute. Ava turned, her smile gentle but unreadable. "I wondered if I'd see you." Jenna swallowed hard. "I needed to. I finished the training every module, and now I'm a supervisor. They promoted me." Ruth, standing nearby, smiled. "That's wonderful, dear." Jenna's eyes filled. "I owe all of you my second chance." Ava shook her head. "No, Jenna, you earned it. We didn't rebuild this company to punish, we rebuilt it to prove that understanding is the only kind of altitude that matters." They embraced. Cameras clicked discreetly from afar. Later that night, when the crowd had thinned and speeches ended, Ava slipped out to the empty hangar. The air smelled faintly of jet fuel and fresh paint. A single aircraft waited by the open doors, its tail marked with the name Ruth and Thomas. She laughed quietly through tears. Her father's voice echoed behind her. "You weren't supposed to see that until tomorrow." "It's perfect," she whispered. He stepped beside her, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "You remember what I told you the day you came home with us?" Ava nodded. "You said love doesn't need wings. It already flies." Thomas smiled. "Still true." They stood in silence as a late-night flight roared down the runway, engines shaking the floor, the lights stretching into the dark horizon. Ava watched until the glow disappeared into the clouds. Then she whispered, "System stable. Humanity airborne." Ruth called from behind them, "Come inside, baby. The night's getting cold." Ava turned, her heart full, her voice steady. "Not tonight, Mama. The sky's warm enough for everyone now." The next morning, the world was still talking about it. News anchors replayed clips of Ava's speech beside photos of Thomas and Ruth smiling proudly in the front row. Newspapers printed headlines like, "From humiliation to history, the family who changed the skies. CEO Ava Sinclair Evans, ethics takes flight." But in the Evans home by the sea, there were no cameras, no noise, just the sound of waves tapping against the shore. Ava sat barefoot on the porch steps, sipping tea while Ruth watered the flowers. The morning sun painted their faces gold. Peace, finally, was louder than applause. "Your father says he's never seen so many people cry during a corporate speech," Ruth teased gently. Ava laughed. "If I knew that was possible, I'd have charged admission." Ruth set down the watering can and looked at her daughter, really looked. You've been carrying the world on your shoulders for too long, baby. It's okay to rest now. Ava shook her head softly. Rest isn't the same as stopping, Mom. It's what lets me keep going. Ruth smiled, recognizing that stubborn resolve. You got that from your daddy. Inside, Thomas sat at the kitchen table surrounded by newspapers. He was circling every article with her name, as though collecting proof that the struggle had been worth it. When Ava walked in, he grinned. Look at this New York, London, even Tokyo. They're calling you the most influential CEO since your old man's boss started the airline. Ava chuckled. You mean since Dad refused to retire until someone competent showed up? Thomas folded the paper. Competent doesn't cover it. You built something solid out of smoke. That's not business, that's belief. She sat across from him. Belief is all you and Mom ever gave me. I just turned it into policy. His eyes softened. No, sweetheart. You turned it into proof. That afternoon, the three of them drove to Skylink's new Humanity, Wing, a training center built in honor of the Evans Initiative. The lobby walls displayed portraits of employees who'd completed the program mechanics, pilots, attendants, janitors, each smiling beneath the slogan. Altitude is shared. As they entered, trainees applauded quietly, respectful but sincere. A young woman approached Ava shyly, holding a worn-out training manual. Ma'am, she said, I'm from the first class of the program. Before this, I was planning to quit aviation. I thought the sky wasn't meant for people like me. Ava smiled and placed a hand over hers. Then it's a good thing you didn't quit. The sky belongs to anyone who believes they deserve to breathe in it. The young woman's eyes filled. Thank you for giving me a reason to stay. When she left, Ruth whispered to her daughter, You see, that's legacy, not leadership. Later that day, Ava stood at the observation deck with her parents. Beyond the glass, a line of planes prepared for takeoff. The one nearest to them bore the inscription The Evans Principal just below its window row. Thomas chuckled. Never thought I'd see my name on a jet. Ruth smirked. You always said you wanted to fly first class. Ava slipped her arms around both of them. Now you own first class and every other seat on board. The engines roared to life, vibrating through the floor, and they watched the aircraft lift into the soft pink sky. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Ruth whispered, We did it, didn't we? Ava shook her head gently. No, Mom, you did. I just made the world notice. Thomas exhaled, his smile breaking slowly. Well, baby girl, he said quietly, the sky looks a lot different when it's looking back at you. That evening, as the sun dipped into the ocean, the Evans family drove home. The wind smelled of salt and jasmine. In the rearview mirror, Ava saw her parents holding hands, framed by the orange glow of sunset. For once, there was no tension to chase, no injustice to correct, just the simple beauty of balance restored. System stable, Ava whispered under her breath, smiling to herself. Her mother, without looking up from her knitting, murmured, And heart's clear. The car moved down the coastal road, its shadow stretching long and graceful behind it like wings finally at peace. Autumn came to the coast gently, as if the world itself didn't want to disturb the peace that had finally found the Evans family. The house smelled of cinnamon and sea air. Seagulls drifted above the porch like slow-moving kites. For the first time in years, Ava wasn't racing between airports or board meetings. Her laptop stayed closed. The world seemed to run fine without her constant hand on the throttle. And that realization filled her with both relief and awe. A visit from the past one crisp morning. A knock came at the door. Thomas answered, expecting a neighbor. Instead, a young man stood there in uniform, hat tucked under his arm. Mr. Evans? He asked. Thomas nodded warily. My name's Caleb Mendez. I'm a flight attendant with Skylink. I was mentored by Jenna Hollis. At the sound of that name, Ruth appeared, wiping her hands on a towel. Jenna? She said softly. Caleb smiled. She told us to find you if we ever felt like we were losing our way. She said you'd remind us what we're working for. He handed Thomas a small envelope. Inside was a photo. Jenna standing with her new trainee class, all wearing pins engraved with the Evans Initiative. On the back, she'd written, For the family who gave the sky its conscience. Thomas's throat tightened. He passed the photo to Ruth, who pressed a hand over her heart. Ava took it last, studying Jenna's face, no arrogance left, only quiet pride. She really changed, Ava murmured. Ruth smiled. Because you didn't shut the door on her. Ava's voice softened. I just gave her a second runway. Legacy in motion 2 weeks later. Ava received an invitation to speak at the International Aviation Summit in Singapore. She initially declined. Then her mother said, "Honey, if you want your message to last, you can't just whisper it from home. You gotta take it back to the skies." So, she went. The summit's grand hall glittered with mirrored ceilings and global press. When Ava took the stage, she carried nothing but a small folder and her composure. "I'm not here to talk about profit margins," she began. "I'm here to talk about altitude, not the kind measured in feet, but in empathy." She paused as a massive screen behind her lit up with photos. Crews helping elderly passengers, pilots greeting children, mechanics writing thank you notes to attendants. "This," Ava continued, "is the real economy of flight. When people feel seen, they soar." The audience rose to its feet, applause thunderous. Executives from rival airlines approached afterward, asking to license her program. But Ava just smiled. "It's free," she said. "Kindness shouldn't come with conditions." Coming home. When Ava returned to the coast, twilight was settling over the water. Her parents were on the porch waiting, a small table set for three. Thomas poured tea as she sat down. "You look lighter," he said. "I feel lighter," she admitted. "It's like the sky's flying itself now." Ruth chuckled. "Sounds like someone's finally learning delegation." Ava laughed, leaning back. For the first time, her shoulders weren't tense. Her pulse wasn't wired with urgency. She looked toward the horizon where a single plane traced a silver line across the fading blue. "Every time I see one," she said softly, "I still think about that day." Ruth reached for her hand. "And every time I do, I think about what came after. The world didn't break, baby, it bent toward better." Later that night, Ava walked alone along the beach. The tide lapped against her feet, cold but steady. Above her, the sky glittered with stars, and somewhere high above, she knew, one of her company's flights was crossing the ocean, crewed by people who now worked with hearts open. She whispered into the wind, "Keep them safe." A faint rumble answered far off, like the sky acknowledging her. Back at the house, Ruth had left a note on the kitchen table. "Don't forget you promised to rest tomorrow. The world's flying fine tonight." Ava smiled, folded the note into her journal, and turned off the light. Outside, the sound of engines drifted through the night, not loud, not harsh, just rhythmic and alive, like the steady pulse of a world finally learning how to breathe at altitude. Winter came softly to the shoreline, wrapping the Evans home in silver light and long shadows. Inside, warmth hummed a kettle's whistle, the crackle of a small fire, laughter that no longer carried exhaustion behind it. Ava sat cross-legged on the rug, surrounded by notes for her next project. Not corporate memos this time. Letters. Real letters. She was replying to flight attendants, passengers, and students who'd written from around the world. Each envelope told a different story. One man describing how he'd apologized to a colleague after watching her speech. A teenage girl who now dreamed of becoming a pilot. A grandmother thanking her for proving dignity could travel first class. Ruth watched from the couch, knitting in slow rhythm. "You still answer every single one?" Ava nodded. "If they took time to write, I can take time to listen." Her mother smiled. "You turned customer service into a calling." That weekend brought another surprise, an invitation embossed with the Skylink crest. The company was launching a scholarship fund for aviation students from underrepresented backgrounds. They wanted the family present. At the ceremony, the auditorium overflowed with cadets in crisp uniforms. The walls were lined with banners bearing the Evans Initiative's creed. Empathy before altitude, because every seat carries a story. As Ava stepped to the microphone, she spotted Jenna in the crowd, now training director, standing beside Caleb Mendez and dozens of new recruits. Her parents sat in the front row, hands clasped like anchors. "When we first started," Ava said, her voice steady, "I thought I was fixing a company. I realize now we were healing an industry. Airplanes don't just carry passengers, they carry possibilities. Every time you look someone in the eye and treat them like they belong, you keep that plane in the air." The applause was thunderous, but Ava barely heard it. She was watching her mother wipe a quiet tear and her father give a small, proud nod that said mission accomplished. Later, as dusk fell, the family walked along the tarmac to where the new training aircraft waited. The name painted across its nose made Ruth stop mid-stride. "The Sinclair Evans Legacy." Thomas chuckled. "That's a mouthful for a jet." Ava laughed. "It carries a lot of history." They were invited aboard for the inaugural flight. The cabin was simple, elegant, lined with photos of real employees who'd helped design the reforms. On every headrest was stitched the same phrase Ruth had once told her daughter years ago, "Fly nice." As the engines warmed, Ruth turned to Ava. Do you ever think about that day? The first one? Ava nodded slowly. Every time I board a plane. It reminds me what silence costs and what one voice can save. The plane lifted through clouds tinted rose and gold. Below, the coastline shimmered like a memory fading into peace. When they leveled out, the captain's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Legacy flight. Today's journey is dedicated to those who taught us that respect, once airborne, never lands. Ruth reached for Thomas's hand. Ava leaned her head against her mother's shoulder. No cameras, no audience. Just three souls who had rewritten the altitude of human decency. Hours later, back on the ground, they lingered near the runway lights. Planes ascended one by one into the dark, their engines humming like distant hymns. Ava whispered, "System stable." Thomas added, "Heart steady." Ruth smiled, finishing softly, "And love at cruising altitude." The three of them stood there until the last jet disappeared into the stars, the wind carrying their laughter upward, proof that the sky had, at last, learned their language. The sea was calm that morning, so calm that the horizon looked like it had been drawn with a single steady hand. The Evans house sat quietly above it, sunlight spilling through wide windows, catching on the edges of framed photographs. Ava stood barefoot in the kitchen, brewing coffee while her parents sat at the table, reading letters from former employees. Some were written in careful script, others printed on airline stationery. Each one told a different chapter of the same story: how the Evans Initiative had saved someone's job, inspired forgiveness, or restored faith in humanity. Ruth looked up from one letter, her eyes wet but smiling. This one's from a woman in Cape Town. She says she started her own small airline after taking your ethics training. Ava smiled softly. "She didn't take my training, Mom. She took our example." Thomas chuckled from behind his newspaper. "Guess that means we're officially contagious." Ruth elbowed him playfully. Finally, something worth catching. Laughter filled the kitchen, gentle, familiar, whole. Later, Ava walked outside with her coffee, the breeze tugging softly at her robe. The sea below whispered like an old friend. For years, it had been her refuge, a horizon that demanded nothing, judged nothing, just reminded her to breathe. Now, it reflected back her peace. She watched a plane pass far above, just a silver streak in the blue. She wondered if the passengers inside knew how different their journey was today, how many unseen hearts had made their safety and comfort possible. She whispered, "Fly kind." It wasn't a command anymore. It was a prayer. That afternoon, Mia, her goddaughter, the child of one of the early Skylink trainees, came to visit. She was 10, full of energy, curious eyes glinting like polished glass. "Aunt Ava," she said, running into her arms. "My teacher said we have to do a report about heroes. Can I write about you?" Ava blinked, then smiled. "Only if you promise to tell the truth." Mia tilted her head. "What's the truth?" "That heroes don't fix everything," Ava said gently. "They just remind everyone that broken doesn't mean over." Mia grinned. "Then I'm definitely writing about you." That night, the family hosted dinner for the local community employees, friends, students from the new scholarship program. The backyard glowed with lantern light, and laughter drifted over the waves. Ruth had cooked for 20. Thomas had built an extra table just for the occasion. When Ava stood to speak, she didn't raise her glass for a toast. She simply looked around at the people gathered, diverse faces, familiar hearts. "You all turned turbulence into triumph," she said softly. "And somehow, you made it look effortless." Applause followed, but she waved it off, smiling. "No speeches tonight," she added, "just gratitude." The evening continued in warmth, stories, songs, quiet joy. And as stars began to scatter across the sky, Ava looked at her parents seated together, still holding hands after decades. She realized then that their love was the real blueprint. Everything else, every reform, every policy, had been her attempt to put that love into the world's hands. Later, after the guests had left, Ruth stood beside her daughter under the porch light. "You know, baby," she said softly, "all those people came here to thank you. But the truth is, you were just doing what we taught you to stand when someone's sitting alone." Ava's throat tightened. "You taught me to stand with grace." Ruth smiled. "And you taught us to fly with purpose." From inside, Thomas called out, "If y'all are going to have another heart-to-heart, at least bring in the dishes." They laughed, and for a moment, the years fell away. They were just a family again, no titles, no headlines, no battles left to fight. Before bed, Ava wrote a final line in her journal. "Peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's the proof you survived it and stayed kind." She closed the book, placed it on the nightstand, and glanced once more out the window. The moonlight touched the sea in silver. Somewhere above it, another Skylink plane moved through the night steady, silent, carrying hearts instead of passengers. And for the first time in her life, Ava didn't need to watch over it. The world finally was flying right. Morning sunlight spilled through the curtains, painting golden stripes across the floor. Ruth hummed quietly in the kitchen, the smell of cornbread and coffee drifting through the house. Thomas sat near the window, his glasses sliding down his nose as he read the newspaper. On the front page was another article about the Evans Initiative now being implemented in train systems and hospitals. He smiled, shaking his head. "Look at that. Your girl started a whole kindness contagion." Ruth poured him coffee. "Good. The world needed a fever like that." Ava appeared, hair loose, wearing her father's old college sweatshirt. "Morning troublemakers." Ruth smiled. "Morning legacy." They ate together without hurry, a habit that had become their new ritual. No phones, no screens, just food and laughter the way the world had always meant it to be. When breakfast ended, Thomas folded his paper and said, "Got a call last night from the Smithsonian. They want to add something new to the exhibit." Ava frowned. "Another speech recording?" "Nope," he said. "They want us, the whole family. They're calling it The Day Kindness Took Flight." Ruth laughed. "Lord, I don't need my face in a museum." Ava smirked. "Too late. The world already put you there in its memory." That afternoon, they drove into the city. The museum's aviation hall shimmered with glass and steel. Inside, a full-scale Skylink aircraft was suspended midair, its hull engraved with the Evans Initiative motto. Nearby, a display played footage from years before the confrontation that had started it all. The video was muted now, accompanied instead by the sound of children's laughter echoing through the exhibit. A group of students stood before the display, listening to a guide explain how one act of courage reshaped global aviation. A little boy raised his hand. "So, she didn't shout or fight?" The guide smiled. "No, she just stood up and spoke the truth." Ava watched from a distance, unseen, her heart swelling. Ruth leaned toward her. "That's better than any award, isn't it?" Ava nodded. "It's proof that the message outlived the moment." Later that evening, the family stopped at a small diner they used to visit when Ava was in college. The same waitress, now older, slower, but just as kind, recognized them immediately. "Lord, look who it is!" she exclaimed. "The family that made the sky kind again." Ruth laughed. "We just made sure folks could ride in it without being insulted." The waitress poured them coffee. "You know, my grandson's a pilot now because of your scholarship program. He says every time he taxis down the runway, he whispers your motto, empathy before altitude." Ava's eyes softened. "Then he's flying right." They lingered long after the plates were cleared, watching dusk settle outside the diner windows. It was one of those ordinary evenings that felt quietly wholly simple, human enough. Back home, Ava found herself on the porch again, notebook open. The stars had begun to prick through the velvet dark. She started to write, "Kindness is air. You can't see it, but everything alive depends on it." She paused, smiling, and underlined it twice. Ruth joined her a moment later, draping a shawl over her daughter's shoulders. "Writing another speech?" "No," Ava said softly. "Just documenting peace. It's rare. I don't want to forget what it sounds like." Thomas stepped out too, handing her a steaming mug. "For the world's youngest philosopher." She grinned. "Retired philosopher, thank you very much." He looked out at the horizon. "You know what I realized, baby? Planes ain't the only things that rise. People do too, if they've got someone who believes they can." Ava looked between her parents, the two who had lifted her, long before the world knew her name, and whispered, "Then I had the best pilots." They sat there together in silence, watching a plane cross the night sky, its lights blinking steady, unwavering, like the heartbeat of a world finally learning how to care. Spring returned with the sound of gulls and wind chimes. The ocean shimmered like liquid glass, and wildflowers had begun to climb the dunes again. The Evans home was quieter now. No press calls, no reporters, just the hum of ordinary life stitched together with gratitude. Ava stood on the back porch, suitcase beside her. The morning light caught her reflection in the sliding glass door. For the first time in years, she looked entirely at peace. She was leaving for Nairobi. Skylink's new partnership program was launching there. This time, she wasn't flying to defend her company or repair a scandal. She was going to teach. Ruth came out carrying a scarf. "Here, baby. You know how airplane air gets cold." Ava smiled, letting her mother wrap it around her neck. "Still treating me like I'm 12. Ruth brushed a curl from her face. You'll always be 12 when I'm worried about you. Thomas appeared with a thermos, coffee for the long flight, and a little note inside. Don't open it till you're in the air. Ava hugged them both tightly. I don't deserve you to. Thomas chuckled. Sure you do. You're the proof our prayers had good aim. At the airport, the staff greeted her like family. The ticket agents, the mechanics, even the janitors knew her by name. Each wore a pin shaped like a small pair of silver wings, engraved with the initials EE for Evans Ethics. A young attendant stopped her before boarding. Ma'am, I just wanted to say, I used to be afraid of flying. Not because of turbulence, because of people. Then I watched what you did. Now I love my job. Ava touched her shoulder gently. Then carry that love into every aisle you walk. She boarded quietly, finding her seat by the window. As the plane taxied, she opened the thermos. Inside was her father's familiar handwriting on a folded napkin. Altitude is borrowed. Integrity is owned. Her eyes glistened. She folded the napkin carefully, placing it in her journal beside a line she'd written months earlier. System stable. Hearts clear. Hours later, high above the clouds, she stared out at the horizon. The world below was a watercolor of rivers and ridges, lives intersecting like delicate circuitry. Somewhere down there were people she'd never meet, whose journeys would be safer, kinder, because of a moment that began with injustice and ended in understanding. She thought of that first flight, the fear, the humiliation, the quiet fury, and how her mother's trembling hands had steadied her that day. Now, years later, it wasn't anger she remembered. It was her mother's calm voice saying, "Baby, it's okay." Ava smiled through the tears. "It really is now, Mom." When the plane landed in Nairobi, applause filled the cabin. A tradition that had started spontaneously years ago after her viral flight now happened on every Skylink landing. The thank you clap. Ava stood in the doorway, greeting passengers as they left, shaking hands, listening to accents from around the world blend into something universal. One woman pressed a small paper crane into her palm. "For luck," she said. Ava looked down. Written in careful script on the wing were 3 words: fly with kindness. That night, after the opening ceremony, she video called home. Ruth answered first. Then Thomas leaned in beside her. "We watched the live stream," he said proudly. "You spoke like someone who owns the sky." Ava laughed softly. "No one owns the sky, Daddy. We just borrow it long enough to make it better." Ruth's voice trembled with affection. "Well, you made it better for all of us." The call ended, and Ava stepped out onto her hotel balcony. The city below glowed with warm lights. Above, another plane crossed silently, its tail gleaming with the Skylink emblem. She whispered into the night, "Keep climbing, world." The wind answered with a gentle hush, as if the heavens themselves were breathing her words back to her. In that moment, thousands of miles from home, wrapped in moonlight and memory, Ava realized she had completed the journey her parents began. The fight for dignity had become a rhythm, a culture, a future. The sky no longer needed defending. It simply needed remembering. She closed her eyes, smiled, and whispered one final phrase: system stable. Love in flight. The world at last obeyed.